Imagine that you are reading a book. You are halfway to the end of the story. You decide to jump to the last pages to see how the story ends. You realize that you spoiled the lecture since you didn't understand why the story ends like that. In fact, you hated the end of the story. The story is already written from the beginning to the end and apparently cannot be changed since you are just a reader. Every move, every thought, every word spoken, an action or mistake from the protagonists and characters, and every single detail in the environment of the story has been already printed in the timeline. The book has no time, just paragraphs organized in a logical timeline that, to the reader, creates the illusion of time and actions. You go back and continue reading where you left halfway, and after a few chapters, you start getting the notion of the outcome you read at the end of the tragic story. At this point, you realize that you are in fact the author of this book being read, and that you are not just a reader, but the writer. You are so in depth in the reading that you totally forgot you were the writer. So you start reading from the beginning again, revising your work. But this time, you rewrite some of the prose to alter the events for a better outcome. You finish your edition, and now you have two versions of the same book. Similar stories with different parallel timelines and outcomes. You're still not totally satisfied with your work, so you start planning multiple ways to end the story. And you start reading so deeply into the story, impersonating the main character and the protagonists, that you forgot again who you are. You forgot that you are the author of that world, the creator of things. This universe is exactly like reading a book. The story has already been written from start to finish, and all of us are readers of the story. We are so deep in the story that we forgot that we are the author. It's not possible to change the story until we realize who we truly are. In life, that is called the spiritual awakening. When we stop being driven by the reading programs in our timeline, we realize that we're not just a reader, but the creators of our own reality. That time is an illusion, created by a bunch of written code organized logically, and that we can live or read this same life many times to adjust, correct, and enhance it. We live in a multi-universe, like a set of infinite numbers of books telling the same story, but with small variations. This can be proven by quantum mechanics. Science can prove this. In the famous two-slit experiment, when particles are shot through two slits, particles that are not observed or measured behave as waves. Only when the trajectory of the particles is measured, the particles behave as particles and not as waves. So simple observation, changes the results of the experiment. How this experiment proves the universe timeline is already written from the beginning to the end. There are two scenarios in this experiment. One scenario when the trajectory is not measured, and when the result in the screen is the pattern of waves. In the other scenario, a device to measure the trajectory is installed, and the immediate result is a pattern of particles in the background screen. 3 hours later, the scientist reads the measure made by the device that is observing the trajectory and realizes that the measure matches exactly with the particles pattern in the screen. It's like the universe knows that somebody will read the measures, and so the universe makes the correction and adjusts to convert the wave into particles. Some people says there's a universal consciousness that knows the future and predicts, but that's not the case. The universe is not feeding back information to the past from the future. The story was already being written, and the scientist was supposed to measure and not measure. The past and present and the future are all already there, written like the next paragraphs in a book, creating the illusion of time. The scientist in this scenario is dispersing the timelines of the universe into multiple directions when deciding whether to implement a trajectory to measure in the experiment or not. In this case, 2 stories are written from the beginning of the universe until the end of the universe. The quantum field is ambiguous and unknown. It is the set of all possibilities of the story not yet written, where the absolute does not exist because everything is possible, and when the absolute truth does not exist because everything happened already, in parallel timelines or identical books with variants of the same story. Yes, we are reading the story with our 7 senses. If you're still following cultural traditions and expectations driven by any kind of fear, such as fear of loss, fear of criticism or rejection, as well as dealing with insecurities, rather than being authentic to yourself by accepting yourself as the protagonist of this story and making the difference through ethics, you're nothing more than a reader, unable to fully manifest as the author and creator of your universe.